Now the thing, again, if anyone doesn't have a Book of Common Prayer, we want to make sure you have one. I still have hardback editions, and we also have some paperback editions of ours. Now, again, just briefly, I gave you a thing that talked about the descent or kind of the lineage of the American Prayer Book. Just a quick reminder from that, it came from both the Book of Common Prayer of England and the Scottish Prayer Book. And the Americans, basically in 1789, took the rights of both and combined to make what we had as our first 1789 Book of Common Prayer. Then in the American Church, there was an 1789, 1852, 1928, and 1979. I think I'm missing one. I have the handouts from last week. Okay, I don't see it, but that's okay. So the American Prayer Book, the 1979 edition that we currently have, is the one that took into context of the more historical liturgies with the Elizabethan language, but also putting it in modern language, which we call Rite 2, which is what we use in overwhelmingly most of all of our worship and our liturgies. So you have that. Now, the Book of Common Prayer, obviously, it guides our worship, because one of the things, it doesn't matter wherever you go on the earth, and if you're going to a church that's part of the Anglican Communion, they are going to have a Book of Common Prayer. And it is kind of our commonality that unites us throughout the world, that even if you go there, if things are a little different and it's in a language you never understand, I can pretty much guarantee that at certain parts of that service, you're going to know exactly what they're doing. And you're like, oh, we're at the prayers of the people. I may not understand what they're saying, but we're at the prayers of the people. So we have that type. Now, these rites come from, obviously, both what has been had in the ancient Roman rites, but also in some of the Celtic rites, and as well as the Eastern Orthodox rites from the East. So, and because we have that thing I mentioned last week called the Epiclesis during the actual Eucharist, when we say, have the words of institution, this is my body, this is my blood, but afterwards when it says, therefore, your spirit upon these gifts, that they may be the body and blood, where it's called the Epiclesis, invoking of the Holy Spirit upon the gifts, that they may be to us the body and blood of Christ. That comes from the Eastern rites, mostly. So, and you won't see that in some of your Western churches. Now, as we pretty much know, on Sundays, what has become the norm in the Episcopal Church and almost all Anglican churches is the Eucharist. The Eucharist, meaning the Thanksgiving, the service in which we gather. Now, what we do on Sundays, do you all know that if you look in like a Book of Common Prayer, the most fun page, we open to page 355. That's the beginning of the service. And when you turn there, I'll show you something. It will say, the Holy Eucharist, Rite 2. Now, at the very first thing it says in big letters, the Word of God. Now, so you go through and there's a service of that. And then there's on page 361, in equally big letters, it says the Holy Communion. Our service, that what we do on Sundays, are two services combined into one. And I think I mentioned something about that in kind of how we got there, that in early Christian communities, the majority of them, of course, in Palestine were Jewish. So they were used to going on Friday to the synagogue for the Sabbath and at sundown, and to have what we call the liturgy of the Word, or the Word of God. They would gather, have the scriptures read, they'd offer prayers. Someone might do reflections on what the scriptures are saying to them. And that was that part. So early Christians continued that. But Sunday, being the day of the resurrection, the Lord's Day, they would then gather in the morning, and they would gather around the table and celebrate communion and honoring the day of the resurrection of Jesus. So as the church continued to grow and grow and became less specifically just Jewish, but becoming this thing that was no longer Jew or Gentile. It was crossing those borders, and it became more distinct, because early on it was seen as a sect of Jewish faith. It then became something other than that, becoming an established kind of what we'd say is a religion of Christianity. So what they did is they just gathered on the Lord's Day, on Sunday, and then they just brought the service together. And that's what we still have from very early ancient days. We gather for the liturgy of the word, liturgy meaning worship, and then the liturgy of the table, the sacrament. So, and we often say that we are a church of word and sacrament. So in the sense that kind of embraces both our Catholic or original apostolic roots, as well as our understanding of basic Reformed tradition of calling us to embrace, and not have some of the excesses. So we get both word and sacrament. And now there are other services. Now Sunday, that is the prime way in which worship. The Eucharist is always the precedent for worship on Sunday, as long as you have the people in orders and so forth be there to do that. Now that brings me into the other thing we're going to talk about today. I said the Apostolic Orders of the Church. When Episcopalians or Anglicans talk about that we are part of the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church, but when we say that in the Creed, when any of you first heard that, did you ever think that meant, I believe in the one Roman Catholic Church? Anybody, that's what you thought? I'm just curious. Okay. That's not surprising. Okay. So, in fact, you will notice when I do this, it's just part of who I am, because I clarify. Whenever I'm speaking to my brothers and sisters in the Roman Catholic Church, I refer to them as the Roman Catholic Church, because they are part of the Catholic Universal Church, but under the Roman rights and authority of Rome. We are also Catholic Christians and also participate in the full apostolic tradition and what we call, many of you heard about Apostolic Succession. What that is churches that continue in what we call the historic, original Christian faith of when we say, will you continue in the apostles' teaching, fellowship, and the breaking of the bread? And we say, I will with God's help. That means, will we live into the faith that Jesus handed down to his apostles, disciples, and then from there, the church, from Pentecost going out into the world. So there are those who are then ordained for roles within the life of the church. Now, the one that is primary and is most important, in which all others exist, is being ordained in the sense of the laity, of being the baptized. All of us, our baptism is our ordination in the truest sense. When we are baptized, we all come into the order of the fullness of the body of Christ, the church throughout the world. And then there are some who are called and set aside for other tasks within that church. And there's 3 of them. I think most of you know. Don't tell me. But the other orders. I'm one of them.
Deacon, priest.
Deacon, priest, and bishop. There you go. So, all of those services, by the way, in the Book of Common Prayer here, this is the one good thing. I really encourage you to explore in here. And I wanted to take a section to just go in and introduce about how to use it in many ways. But in the table of contents, it gives you a really good sense of, you have everything in here from morning prayer and evening prayer. Those come from the original monastic offices, the times of prayer during the day that Christians, Jews, and Muslims all share. We've kind of narrowed ours, unless you're in a monastery or a convent, it's different. They tend to gather for those different hours during the day, throughout morning, afternoon, evening, and night. When the very first Book of Common Prayer was put together in 1549, it was done by Archbishop Thomas Cranmer, who was the Archbishop of Canterbury. He basically took the ancient texts of the church and for the first time compiled them and put them together in the language of the people so that everyone could participate. That's how we got the offices, the services of morning prayer and evening prayer. And they can be said by anyone. You don't have to have clergy, deacons, or priests or bishops to do any of those. So those are for everyone. In here, we also have all the other services. We have special services, like all the services of Holy Week, and all of those things are included in here. You have then all of the services of Eucharist, which are available. There's examples of prayers of the people. There are all the services for ordination. There's the services for marriage, sacramental rites, marriage, sacramental rite of ordination, sacramental rite of unction, prayer for the sick. All of those ones that we went over, those 5 sacramental rites, are all contained in here. Now, when you get to the orders, the first one that is set apart is deacons. And so the word diaconate. And deacons, there is a reference in the book of Acts to the first deacons where they were called to say, because the apostles got they have more and more and more responsibilities. And they're trying to be faithful chief pastors. And so they had those who were basically the needs of both the church and the community. There were people who needed distribution of things to the poor, to the sick, and how we care for them. And what we call interpreting the needs of the world back to the church, saying, hey, here's what is happening. Here's what we can do. Here's what the Spirit is calling us to make a difference. Deacons have the role of primarily being the interpreters of the needs of the world to the church. So a deacon is not a semi-mini priest. It's not what it's meant to be. It's meant to be called for a whole separate task, a task of both teaching and service. And that is one of their primary things to do. Now, they do also task in assisting also in worship and have certain roles. Since they are kind of a symbol of the world to the church, when like the gospel is read, there's certain things like, for instance, you will see if you're, like when the bishops visit, if we had a deacon, you would see specific things that only you all do, only the deacon does, only I do, and only the bishop does. And like a deacon, if a deacon is present, they have precedent to read the gospel, because the gospel is Jesus' words to the world. And the deacon is to say, here is Jesus' words, church. Listen. Okay? So that's why deacons do that. They also generally will lead the prayers of the people because they're to call us to the needs of our world and of the church. So that's one of the reasons that is done. So deacons have a specific call and service. And if you ever want to know them specifically, it's if you want to say, well, what really, what separates a deacon, priest, and bishop? If you go in here and just look at the ordination service, there's the one section there that says that they say before, in the service, they take vows. It says, this is what you were called to do. Lays it out very completely. And so a deacon does it. A deacon can baptize. One of the things that a deacon is not ordained to be mainly a sacramental person in the sense of they are not authorized to celebrate the Eucharist. Okay? For whether we like it or not, that's kind of the way that is. And so then there's the next order of priests. Now, of course, by the way, still following the ancient kind of apostolic succession, and there's a lot of talk about whether this should be done or not. But every person, if you're a bishop, Bishop Scott was first, of course, baptized. He was baptized as a Christian. And at some point, he said, I feel a calling. A lot of times people say, I feel maybe a calling to the priesthood. Well, if you feel that calling to the priesthood, once you've gone through seminary and your training and all that you go through, you have to be ordained a deacon first. You cannot be ordained directly as a priest or directly as a bishop. So every priest has been a deacon. Like I was ordained as a deacon on November 28th, 1992 at All Saints Cathedral in Milwaukee, which was the feast of Kamehameha and Emma of Hawaii, and it was snowing in Milwaukee. So it was Thanksgiving weekend. Now, and what you do is if you're called to the priesthood, you serve as what you call, it's generally spoken, there isn't a real name for it, but we talk about in function. You're called to the transitional diaconate, meaning you will serve as a deacon for a minimum of 6 months, or the norm or to a year, and experience what it is to serve in that capacity. And then you are then ordained a priest. Now, a deacon, if they're called to the diaconate, they go through all their training and they are ordained directly as a deacon. And that's where the ordination tract ends for them because they are fulfilling their call. A priest then, again, you have to be ordained a deacon first. So all priests have been there. Then, if for some reason you are, like we're getting ready to do, like the bishop on April 30th, one of those three, all three candidates are priests. When they are elected, they will then go through the same process and then be ordained to that next office of bishop or episkopos. That's the Greek word, the episcopal. That means bishop. So they will be ordained and consecrated. And I hope when it comes in September, when we have that, as many of you can. I know it's going to be, I forget, it's in some big hall down in Salt Lake City. They're not having it at our cathedral because you couldn't fit.
Do you think it's a salt palace, maybe?
I'm not sure. We got a little time, but it's going to be a large venue. And if some of you can come, it's an incredible celebration. And the presiding bishop will be here. And to ordain a bishop, only bishops can ordain a bishop. And there's usually the chief consecrator, which would be the presiding bishop or the archbishop. So Michael, our presiding bishop, will be here. And there will usually be at least 3 to 5 other bishops. They will then lay hands on him or her and then consecrate them a bishop, and which is the office of the apostles. That's the Apostolic Order. So what you have in the historic order, there's always been then bishop and episcopos. A bishop in the Greek means basically chief pastor, or the. It also can be translated directly into overseer. Although that's an awkward word for us because it sounds like a slave thing, an overseer. But it's meant as like one to guide, one to be that chief pastor to guide the people. Then a priest is to serve the local congregations and their communities, but their primary task is being, again, in fact, this is kind of, let me just do this and we're going to move on from the orders. But in the ordination service, here we go. For priest, there's a part there where it says the examination at the ordination. And just bear with me. This is, if you happen to have one, it's page 531. Yeah, that one. That's okay. So page 531, it says, the bishop addresses the ordinand as follows. My brother, the church is the family of God, the body of Christ, and the temple of the Holy Spirit. All baptized people are called to make Christ known as Savior and Lord, and to share in the renewing of his world. Now you are called to work as a pastor, priest, and teacher, together with your bishop and fellow presbyters are priests, and to take your share in the councils of the church. Okay, already you've given some indication right there, all right? As a priest, it will be your task to proclaim by word and deed the gospel of Jesus Christ, and to fashion your life in accordance with its precepts. You are to love and serve the people among whom you work, caring alike for young and old, strong and weak, rich and poor. You are to preach. You are to declare God's forgiveness to penitent sinners, to pronounce God's blessings, to share in the administration of holy baptism and in the celebration of the mysteries of Christ's body and blood, and to perform the other ministrations entrusted to you. And all that you do, you are to nourish Christ's people from the riches of his grace, and to strengthen them to glorify God in this life and in the life to come. That's pretty heavy. It's a lot there. So it tells you right there, you preach, you declare God's forgiveness, you bless, you share the sacraments, you proclaim the word, you teach, you care for those of all who are alike. Now, when you get to that examination of deacons and bishops, there are things that we share, but it will be specifically different. So that's one of the things, if you want to look at, it would be actually kind of good for you to look at it, because a lot of times I think there's not always a lot of understanding about what really is the difference between a deacon, priest, and bishop. Look at the ordination service in your prayer book, and when you have some time, you'll see those. And if you have some questions, like one-on-one or something, we can take a couple of minutes and I can show those to you and go over them. Okay. So one of the things when we talk about, anybody got questions about the orders and so forth? Yes.
So once you're a bishop, there's no other ordination, so like presiding bishop created and have to be ordained again, or
that's a good question actually. I was very fortunate. I just happened to be on a trip to Washington D.C. as a tourist, and I was already a priest, and I was there, and it just so happens when Catherine Jeffert Shores, when she was elected presiding bishop, I just happened to be there the week she was to be consecrated as the presiding bishop. Wow. And it was at the National Cathedral, which is our cathedral. And someone I was visiting said, I just happen to have an extra ticket. Oh. And when I sat down during the service, the person who I was sitting next to was just in the news for a sad reason this week. I sat next to Madeleine Albright, the former Secretary of State, who was very devout Episcopalian. And at first I looked over and said, that lady sure looks like Madeleine Albright. And then I heard her talk, during the liturgy, I went, that is Madeleine Albright. And you just don't expect that. But the service was packed. And then what happens there is he was already a bishop. And like Catherine, she was the Bishop of Nevada. But she was now being called for a specific service and role as the presiding or archbishop to serve and help guide in the United States and to be, in a sense, an honorary spokesperson for all Episcopalians, and to also offer guidance for mission and guidance and hope. So they didn't ordain her. There was a special service of consecration to the role of presiding bishop. So there, it wasn't a new ordination. It was a setting aside for a special calling. So that's actually interesting. There's a little difference there. And then for those who ask, we do have, you won't see them in Utah, but the Episcopal Church and around the Anglican community does have monks and nuns. Anybody ever met an Episcopal nun or monk?
I heard that Jesus.
Okay, well, that's at the conference.
A few years back, there was someone attending St. John's for a few weeks who was wearing a habit, and I was like,
oh, really?
Okay, I don't know, I never managed to talk to him, but there was a monk showing up. I had no idea what he was doing here.
Yeah, in my last parish in San Diego, I had a monk, and he wore his habit there and served and would do special things and all. Most of our monasteries and convents are full, and most of them have waiting lists for novices to enter. Part of this is there is not that element of forced celibacy. So people who are coming into our monasteries and convent are going through a very long, and there's a big discernment. You don't just go and show up, hey, I want to be a monk. You would go and initiate those conversations with those leaders, and they would say, you need to begin a process of deep prayer for this type of commitment. It's not to be taken lightly, of course. And so they would then do as a lay novice and that. Now, to be a monk or a nun, you do not have to be ordained. You can be lay or clergy, because you're called for an office and certain orders have specific purposes. So, like one of my favorite, who has one of the it is the oldest order in modern Anglicanism, is the Society of St. John the Evangelist. In the United States, they're headquartered in Cambridge, Massachusetts. In fact, the monastery is on the James River on Cambridge Green, across from Harvard, right? Or is that Harvard? I don't know. I forget which one's in Cambridge. Which is it? I don't know. One of those stuck-up places. No, So the monastery is right there. They're often been referred to as the Cowley Fathers, although not all of them are priests. But the original order was all originally priests. One of their big things is the whole thing of spiritual guidance and development, spiritual development. Many of them are spiritual
Directors.
Yes, thank you. Oh, I need you for all of these. Yeah, spiritual directors. So a lot of people saying, I want to go further in my faith. They set aside and will do that in doing that type of direction over months or years with you. They also have a publishing house where their books are some of the best that they offer things about deeper study and your development. They're also a very public order. They don't sit around just in their monastery. They wear all black habits and they have their little sandals. But the monks if you walk around the Cambridge, the green there, Harvard Green or whatever that little area is called there in Cambridge from the university, they're always walking around. A lot of them are sitting in cafes, having coffee. And there was one monk who, I think he's now deceased, but he was famous for sitting at one of the local pubs and sitting there having a beer and smoking a cigar. And everybody knew Father so-and-so. And every day the guys after work would come by and chat with this monk at the pub. And he always sat outside in his habit and said, basically put out, it's almost like the Snoopy thing, psychiatrist, but he just put his thing out here, monk, here to talk, here, ready to do this. They're very, very much like that. Then, like in Three Rivers, Michigan, there's a Benedictine Monastery, which is much more devoted, more into prayer and also spiritual development, but they live cloistered in a more kind of quiet way. There's also, if any of you ever want to go to some of these places, many of them do welcome people and have rooms you can stay and do retreats. And many of them are wonderful. If you want to ask any more, I can tell you about all the various places in the United States that there are places to go. There's some beautiful ones, for instance, in California along the coast, and some other places as well.
I'm just curious, if they're all full, why isn't there a push to establish more of them?
Well, there's a thing, many of them have expanded and built on, or have added another house, another monastery or convent. The Cali Fathers did that. They were in Cambridge, but then they built a big retreat center in the mountains in New York State, which they do massive kind of spiritual direction and retreats there. They also have another house that they built in California near Santa Barbara, so they really suffer there. And so there's a lot of places that are expanding. Part of the reason when I said most of them are full, these are people who feel, and I want to be careful here, I'm not trying, because there's a lot of wonderful in the Roman Catholic Church of monasteries, convents, and nuns, and some have been very influential in my life. But part of it has felt especially for men who are going to be priests in the Roman Church, some of them enter monasteries because they're mandatory celibacy and they are so lonely that many of them will go to monasteries for some type of a life, but they're not necessarily called to a monastic life. And so sometimes they leave and they just kind of say, well, this isn't fulfilling for me as well. Now, for us, people who are going in there, they already know this and say, this is what I really want. So it kind of has a little bit of difference. Yes?
I just add, there was also an age gap. I actually looked into specifically the one in Santa Barbara.
Oh,
I was too old.
You're too old. That is, actually, when I was very young, I considered it for a little while and looked in and I was kind of going, gosh, I'm already too old for most of these places, yeah.
Do we still have the one in Ogden?
That's
No, that's shut down.
Well, that's what I thought.
Huntsville?
Yeah,
Yeah, that's closed now.
because they didn't have enough people, right?
There is a wonderful convent, Roman Catholic convent. These sisters are I think I got a kick out of talking on the phone. They actually, we sometimes get some of our communion wafers from them, and they actually make communion bread, these sisters, and they're in Salt Lake City. I mean, if you make an order, you get it the next day from these. You don't mess with those sisters.
Right on.
So you do have the various orders. Now, I guess let's kind of go into then some things about with worship. Our primary experience then is on Sundays and is the Eucharist. Okay, and we know there's a lot of things that we do in the service that I think a lot of people sometimes ask and want to have questions about. I'm going to pass around for you. This is a thing called Christian Symbolism, and a lot of times you'll hear words. Sometimes we should say them more. And if you notice, sometimes when I mention at the table in the entry, I'll say, in the narthex, the entry area. So I use our words, but then I don't just assume everybody knows what those are. Because in the Episcopal Church, we're getting a lot of newer people who didn't grow up and know all the lingo. So you just do a little work. So like in here, this is a glossary of terms. If you want to see, let's see, I bet it's got to have narthex in here. It doesn't. How dare they have nave? Did any of you remember me talking about what a nave is?
Actually had that in the crossword puzzle the other day. Yes,
Yeah, I know that one. Yeah, and like for instance, it says here, from the Latin, navis, or ship. It is the body of the church building in front of the chancel and crossing between the aisles. It is where the congregation sits. It is called the nave because the church is often depicted in sacred art as a ship moving heavenward. The pews are like ancient galleys, and the members of the congregation are similarly pulling together in the service. So imagine you're all out there, and I'm just going, come on, faster, faster, you heathens. That's probably not one of the better images for me, though. So here's a lot of these glossaries. On the back, I'm going to go over this real quick, because there's a million terms that sometimes culturally, especially in our country, we use for things of the church. Now, a lot of traditional churches have what we call a cruciform. Meaning you got the long part of the body of the church here, and then they have those side sections. We kind of have that now because of what we changed the building. But here, imagine first, forget our new building for a moment. When St. John's was built, here's the door. Forget these things here exist. Think of the long tube. That's what this church was built as. And if you notice here, it says narthex. So if you go back there where our organists have too much stuff stored, in that area, that's the old narthex, in which you then come into the church, and here's our organ and choir now. But you would go, and this says nave. So the people sit here. And then we don't have these, so you would go, and then used to you would have a section, then one step up were the choir. And in the choir, if they say sit in choir, if you sit in this section, the rows are on both sides facing inward. Because a lot of times the choir would then sometimes, like even in singing in psalms, a lot of times there would be, in songs, they would sing that side, they would sing that side, and alternated verses. And they would also be there to help lead the congregation in the singing, which is prayer and music. So you have the choir. Then this whole area of the choir, and then you have the final section is the area, the final steps around the altar is called the sanctuary. In a lot of American, what I call modern Protestant Christianity, the whole thing is just called the sanctuary. Because if you go to a lot of churches and say, oh, well, there's the sanctuary. And it's okay. It's what people have adapted. But I'm just going to kind of, I guess, talk a little bit about in the way we word things within our churches. So you have the nave, this area called the chancel, which is made up of the choir, and then to the final steps up of the sanctuary. Okay, so now these areas are called transepts in these churches. And a lot of times now you'll see chapels that are in those for midweek worship in a lot of cases. So now what has happened with our church is when they did a little bit of the change in the building, we got this, kind of like this, except the wall ends right here. We have a T. So we do have our huge narthex out there, which is perfect. That's what it's meant for, a gathering space. Then you enter into where the body of the church is. And then here we have kind of the organ and the choir, and here the chapel. This used to be, of course, the high altar over here. The wall is then here, and then you notice there's the one-step platform here, where there is then the altar and the candles and so forth. This is the sanctuary. And you could say these are transepts or chapels, nave, and then narthex. Okay? Hopefully, because I know ours is a little different.
Someone who was at the funeral yesterday
Yeah.
asked me what it was called. I was like, I don't know. Maybe the sanctuary. If I'd had this left.
There you go.
It was the one that had been here before.
So here, take one of those and pass it around. Now, so some symbolism. We call it the Eucharist. So again, that's a Greek word for Thanksgiving. Now, one of the things I think we will do here in a little bit, just to end things up in maybe the last like 20 minutes, 30 minutes, is we may, I guess, do a short field trip. We should probably walk down. I want to take you to, okay, how many of you heard of the sacristy? Okay, so sacristy, and anybody wants to, what do you think is, so what's a sacristy?
Is that the little golden cubby that they keep like the bread and water, bread and wine in?
Well, I know, now that is the tabernacle or the almsray. Now, the sacristy is the room in which all the things that we use for worship is kept. All of the chalices, the bread, all of this kind of stuff. Now, I'm going to take you down there and let you kind of see that, because it's not any great mystery. It's kind of a working, using space. And it has one interesting element in there of something, you can remember this when we get there, called a piscina. Anybody heard of a piscina? Oh, Brent's getting on. He's getting on.
I actually did an episode of that on home improvement.
Really? And piscina comes from the old Latin or Italian, but basically to wash, or meaning a sink, a place for cleansing. So so what we'll do is I'll show you the sacristy, and then there is, they put on the door vestry, but it's like vestry, it means for the vesting room, and where the vestments are kept. So now, before we kind of do some of that, and I'm going to point at stuff and say, this is what this is, that's what this is called, we'll do that. I know that you've probably got some questions maybe about why we do certain things, or what it's called, or what's the symbolism. Let's take a few, anything y'all want to ask, talk about. I know you got to have some.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I can't remember when, but you do this, and then I don't know if you do your notes.
At the gospel. Good. Very good. That's a great one. And because usually you get newer people who maybe not from, when I came to the Episcopal Church for the first time, I saw it, I was like, ooh, what's that? and of course, that's what the only way you're ever going to know is you got to ask. So what this is comes from an ancient tradition that when the gospel is proclaimed to the church, the person doing this to remember that whether it's a deacon or a priest, because by the way, in a Sunday worship, if the deacon is present, I don't read the gospel, the deacon does. If not, then the priest will read it. And it's proclaimed to the people that these are Jesus' words. It matters the most. And if you're proclaiming it, saying, don't just read it, proclaim it. And one of the things you do, and this is, again, one of those things that all may, none must, meaning anybody can do this, but if it's not part of your piety, your own way of expressing your spirituality, you don't have to. And I will tell you, for this and for other things, over time, at first I've never done it. And I remember the first time I did it, I was like, okay, sometimes I felt like, oh, that was really awkward. Or because, I've never done it before. And then I had times like, that was kind of, as I thought about the meaning, it kind of, and then it grew. And there's some things that I do and some things I don't do from this day. But this one, you would, if you're going to do that, whether if you're reading or hearing it, you're saying, as you proclaim or hear the gospel, may the gospel be always in my mind. May it be always proclaimed through my lips. And may it always reside in my heart, that I may live it in my life. So your mind, your mouth, and your heart, meaning your being. So that his cross, that all that is done by his sacrifice. And so it's kind of a way of remembering. So it's just like in any times of the service, whenever we do this, it's to remind us, it is, I have received that grace or this mercy only by what God has given through Christ on the cross and his resurrection. So when you, for instance, whenever we mention, in the Nicene Creed, and we believe in, it's hard to go into the middle of it, where it says, and we believe in the resurrection of the dead. If you notice, a lot of us, and I believe in the resurrection of the dead. Okay? So there's several places in which we cross ourselves. And so the one that you're talking about is always at the gospel. Okay? So that was a good one. Does that make sense? Okay? Yes?
One big difference between Catholic churches and St. John's, no confessionals in St. John's. Why no confessionals?
I mean, are there actually confessionals at St. Thomas Aquinas?
Yes. Well, the new church has a confessional off to the left of the nave.
I think I saw it. It's not like a lot of the traditional ones as much.
No, and St. Thomas, I'm sorry, the Newman Center does have a confessional at the back of the church, a real confessional.
Well, you're getting to one of the things you'll notice. Except during Easter, you're going to notice something's in the liturgy. We don't say the confession. It's optional, but generally, the history of the early worship that's continued down through the churches, during Easter, the time of resurrection, we are living into the resurrection, and we're not called to confession. We're not, because we're celebrating the resurrection. All Lenten and penitential practices are omitted during Eastertide, the 50 days of Easter, kind of up to the culmination of the day of Pentecost. So you will know, as far as confession, the church that I served in Christ the King in Alpine, California, had 2 confession booths in the back. That is a little unusual and rare. Usually if a parish or congregation has a strong Anglo-Catholic background, kind of the more high church, they may have them, but it's very rare. We have actually 2 ways of confession in the Episcopal Church that follows the ancient Catholic order. One is we all have what we call every Sunday, except during Easter, we all have confession. We have the general confession, where I'll say, let us confess our sins against God and our neighbor. That is not done in the Roman Rite, because they have to do it only individually. So for us, we come together and we say, we all know that the things we've done or left undone, we haven't always done, it's just not there. And then we ask for forgiveness and strength. And then when we do that, that's why we then celebrate the peace, because after the absolution, and you'll notice during the absolution, I always make the sign of the cross, because it is through the sign of the cross we have received grace, mercy, and forgiveness. So again, that symbol of that. And then as soon as you declare that absolution, we say, the peace of the Lord be with you. So where in the Roman Rite, the peace is done at the end after the Lord's Prayer. So, which I have to admit is odd for me, because then you're kind of breaking up the central part of coming to the table, and all of a sudden you got to interrupt to say hi to everybody. But it just seems a little odd. Historically, originally in the ancient orders, the peace was always done at the middle of the service to then send you into the Eucharist in full thanksgiving. Now, but I have to admit, it's also my preference. But for confession, there is that, but there is also, we have the sacramental rite of confession and penitence. So when I mentioned that, whether it was last Sunday or Sunday before, if someone, we have, and we should probably talk about it more, and it is used a lot in some parishes more during Lent, and in some parishes where it's become part of their life and piety, like I had a nun in one of my congregations. Whether she needed it or not, Sister Mary needed to have her confession at least every 2 weeks. So I had to hear her confession. Now, and I kept telling, it's like, this lady has not done anything to be sinning about. But for her, it was very important. So confession for us is, since we practice it generally every Sunday, we know that we are forgiven, but say there's something that is just really heavy on your heart. There's something that, you know, God forgives you, but somehow I just don't, my experience of this is not that I feel forgiven. It's painful. There's something that's keeping you either from a closer relationship with God or with other people. So it says in there in the service, and I encourage you to look at it, it says what it is for. It's also in the outline of faith, the catechism. It'll say what is confession, what it's used for. And for us, it is saying that it says, find a priest that you know is discreet and confidential, whom you can trust, and you come in and you share in complete confidence what is going on. And then there is the kind of the things you say, Father or Mother or whatever, here are the things that are, and you say them, and then there's a part where it says, now the person may share whatever else they wish. So they share kind of what is it specifically that's a burden to them. And then it says the priest may offer counsel or direction. And after that time, you do a one-on-one where laying on of hands and pronounce absolution of what there has been a talk about of need for reconciliation. So it's, again, confession means reconciliation of a penitent. There's something that you want reconciliation for. I've used it. Now, I've had some parishes where nobody has used it, and I've had some where people use it regularly. It depends, and it is for us, for the individual. It's, again, all may, none must. Kind of almost our thing. So I have used it a few times in my life, and I have to admit it's been very powerful in helping me in my own spiritual growth. So, I don't know, does that help a little bit, Frank?
Yes, very much.
Okay. And there should probably be more education about that. And that gives me things maybe I can be writing about or sharing with the congregation. What about some other things that happen? Do you wonder what we do? You'll probably think of them as soon as you go home. Yeah.
So when we're doing the Lord's Prayer, I noticed that nobody does anything with their hands. So is there a reason why?
Because your experience is you've seen people either holding hands or doing this?
Yeah, this means give or like prayer.
Mm-hmm.
Well, receive, pray, and this give, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that's in the Roman Catholic, so I was wondering what here.
It is, and that will vary from community to community. I've had really different experiences. I've had some people that when we get to the Lord's Prayer, they're there, usually they're kind of closing their eyes and they sit there and they just say the prayer and they focus on it very quietly. Some congregations you'll see have adapted other things where maybe, and I've seen some where it's just hit and miss. Some people just pray and focus on that. And I've seen others will open their hands. There's a sense of, Lord, I offer this kind of impure receiving. And I had one congregation where someone, and this is a nice idea, but I'm going to tell you why I cautioned about it at times. When somebody starts to do something as a whole congregation and it feels like everybody has to do it that way, is in this congregation when they did the Lord's Prayer, I'm going to get Aubrey's dinner. I'm going to make you feel uncomfortable. So when it says, and now is our Savior Christ taught us to pray. They grab you like this, and then they go, Our Father, Lord, and I mean, look, so the whole congregation is grabbing hands, and Our Father, who art in heaven. And this is the first Sunday I was doing this, just serving as a supply priest. They grabbed my hands, and I'm like, what the heck are these people doing? You lost your mind. So, I'll allow you to say. So, what happened is the whole idea about it was wonderful. We are one community, and we offer up this prayer together in unity. What happened was, it was interesting, when my parents came to San Diego to visit, my mother had a really bad arthritis in her shoulder, and she had some issues there, and she came to church. That lady grabbed her arm, and she almost passed out in pain right there on the floor. And what I tried to explain to this congregation is at one time I even tried to say, why don't, if you wish to raise your hands, do them. But I suggest maybe you not grab hands, because I said, is that really visitor friendly in a sense of you come in and it's a little invasive Okay, I mean, it's enough even holding hands, because some people have personal space issues. You know, and I'm just saying, all of these things are wonderful, accepted gestures of worship. But it can sometimes be not overly welcoming, including when you force everybody to do it with you. And you're so I remember I was so concentrating on what in the heck are they doing, I forgot the Lord's Prayer altogether. But it is good. I've seen what generally has happened. I've seen this this will happen in Roman Catholic parishes. I've seen it in Episcopal churches, Lutheran churches, where there's a liturgical sense where a lot of the congregation will open their hands. And in fact, if you notice, when I am standing at the altar during the Eucharistic prayer, what is it I'm doing generally? It's called the orans position. Orans means to pray, to lift up. And so if you notice how common I do, with palms open, like this. This is one of the most ancient, both in Jewish and early Christian sense of prayer, of coming, of saying, as a gesture, openness. You know, you can just tell it just does, an openness to God. Now, some people don't like to do that, and they feel just as open to God with their hands down, and that's okay. But one of the things, like as a priest, there is this that generally what is to be done. There's certain things you'll notice it'll say during communion, it says, I'm then to then touch the elements, and you do certain things. I will do a gesture, for instance, when we do that invoking oath, I'll be like this, and then, now, Lord, send your Holy Spirit upon these gifts, and all of that. And then I elevate them at times of importance. A lot of people ask about sanctus bells. Today, technically, there's no, what I call, functional reason to use them. Sanctus bells were used when the Mass, the Eucharist, service of Holy Communion, when it was offered, the laity did not know Latin. They didn't know what was going on. They're sitting out there, and many times they're like, a lot of times there was even a screen. You could kind of see what they're doing up there a little bit. The priest has his back to the people. They're doing all of this. And so when they were to know to look up, to pay attention that something was happening, they said, we're going to start ringing bells to let the lay people know, here it is. The words of it, here's the words of institution and the consecration. So, and what would happen is a lot of times people also kept the thing of not looking because it was considered so holy, they wouldn't look upon the sacrament, so they would be bowed during that time, and the ringing would let them know to look up. And that's why they would then hold it up and say, see, the Lord is here. And so that's a lot of times what would happen. And then, now the service is in the language of the people. But the reason we keep certain things of gestures or certain things we do in worship is it's interesting. And I have some Episcopal churches, you'll never hear a sanctus bell. Some you'll hear sanctus bells and incense, and all these vary. Some point, somebody at St. John's liked the aspect of it always, and I'm like this. I think about things where I've gone that was meaningful for me. There's things that, whether it has a practical reason or not, is besides the point. I like it because it reminds me and brings me into a focus of leading me. It's not the ends in themselves, but it's a means that leads me to my focus on Christ. So for many people, when they have the Eucharist and they hear the bells, they know this is holy. This is important. We already know that, but it's an extra layer of why it is. Another layer that can emphasize that is when you use incense. Like on Easter Day, it's a grade of solemnity and celebration, and Sanctus is a symbol of where you're offering, like the gospel today, where the thing of offering this expensive perfume. Incense was considered very expensive. It was something precious. And when you came and you said, we're coming before the Lord, said, we're celebrating the resurrection, we want to offer this sense of an offering of this incense that brings us, because there's the ancient Jewish thing of saying, as incense had a symbol of our prayers rising to God. It also had a sense of incense, if you burned it at its place, that meant this is something special. So when the incense is done, the aroma and all that is to say, the presence of God, the Spirit is here, and we're celebrating that. So God's going to be present in what we're doing, whether I have incense or not. But the incense, bells, and all these things can be for us a tool, a thing of a symbol to lead us into our worship and presence of Christ. You don't have to have them. Like I said, I've actually celebrated a Eucharist on a boulder on top of a mountain with a loaf of bread and a bottle of wine and a cup. And, you know, we're in Egypt at the top of Mount Sinai, so you use what you have. And then we celebrate it sometimes in the most beautiful of altars and churches and so forth where we do this. So God is present in all of those. How we express it are all great. You know, there's all wonderful things in that. So you'll see a lot of different expressions and symbolisms of things. One, like for instance, if I was in shorts and a t-shirt celebrating the Eucharist, it's still the Eucharist. But I would never on Sunday come up there and do that. We have a thing that shows what we're doing and what we're doing. This is special. This is the Lord's Day. I honor it. And so there are certain vestments. Why don't we go down and take a look at some of these things? That may also bring some. Yes.
Okay, I have a question
Sure.
about the bells. So the church I grew up in, we would ring them on some Sundays, but not every Sunday. Like there'd be some Sundays that we would do it. What would be like the reason behind that?
The reason behind that is kind of like the same reason we do incense on some. See, we use bells every Sunday, but you notice we don't use incense every Sunday. We use it for special occasions. What it means is that kind of shows that whole thinking. If we use bells and incense on just those certain occasions, it's to show those occasions are very important. So they would probably do it on big feast days, you know, Pentecost, Easter, maybe Christmas, things like that.
Yeah. We did it, I feel like it was almost like it came out, because I was acolyting, so like I would ring the bells. And so it would be like, I felt like it was not every other time. That was like the average, like 50%. So I don't know if that was like, I think it might be like season wise or something. But.
Well, and sometimes people may do it for like Easter season. People might use it for that, but they might not use it during other times.
Maybe some people like them and some people didn't, so they have to compromise.
But, and that, obviously, I was getting ready. The next thing is sometimes things are done just because, like, okay, I'll give you an example. This is the first church in a while where you don't have an 8 o'clock right one service and 10 o'clock right two. You don't know, Tommy, because that's what you grew up about with. There is this thing, and because you got to have, because there are some people who would never want to go to a right two, and some people who never want to go to a right one. So, for those, let's see if the people who know what I'm talking about here. You're at 8 o'clock, and I say, "The Lord be with you."
And also,
Spirit.
And with thy spirit. Yes. And then our service is also with you. And in fact, this coming Wednesday, if you want to, again, it's a short service, but it's going to be done in Bright 1 this coming Wednesday. So if you come, you're going to want to pay attention to your prayer book, unless you really know it very well. So we can experience. I mean, it's a beautiful. Both are equally valid and wonderful. But you're right. Also, sometimes people like certain things or they don't. And I mean, the one that'll really get people going. Y'all have been pretty not too fussy about this. Usually you have somebody who will get extremely dramatic about incense.
Oh, yeah.
It's just, I mean, it's the end of the world for them or something, you know. But everybody here is pretty, like, we kind of go with the flow. At least that's been my experience so far. Let's go take a quick look at these, and then, so you can kind of get a sense of what some of these things are. We're going to go to the vesting room. So every service we ever do is put into the book. And like I said, this is a new one. So like today, April 3rd, Lent 5, Holy Eucharist in the church, 10 a.m. You put how many people attended, and you can note other things. Yesterday we had a burial service. I noticed, marked that. It was our fourth one of this year. And then the person is to sign. Okay, that's one of the things we do. Now, these drawers are always important because they usually contain some of the vestments that you're going to use. There's almost always, and I came to this and I said, I bet it's this top left, and sure it is, where a lot of the stoles. Okay, so when you pull this out,
Beautiful.
This is a really pretty stole. Palm Sunday is next Sunday. It's red. So, say if we have, this is a stole, and the stole is the main symbol of a priest. And a priest, you sometimes hear this word presbyter, but you can also word Presbyterians kind of got the name of their church. Presbyter means priest or pastor, and the symbol of a presbyter or priest is the stole. The stole is the earliest symbol of that we know back or as early as probably 150, 200 AD, that people were called when they would preside over the services. They would take this, it's a symbol like as a mantle. The mantle of your office. When you put it on, you're reminded of what you're called to do and who you are to serve. Also, you will see a lot of priests. This one has it. This stole here is close to 100 years old. It's mine. It was given to me by a nun. This is a very traditional type stole, usually done in these are all hand embroidered crosses. Now, most stoles traditionally at the neck have a cross. And to remember, here's another symbolism. When a priest vests, a lot of times they come in, unless we're really running late. But you come in, you put, I'm going to show you the alb. After you put your alb on, you take your stole, you kiss it, the cross, and then put it around your neck. Then it's the symbol of the office. So and here we have all of these are either extra stoles or stoles that we use with the sets.
And these are all yours?
No.
Oh.
No, that white one is mine. These others are St. John's. So like here's a white one. Now this is not all of them. Now this one is mine. This is a thing you used to, very rare. Altar guilds a lot of times will get real linen lace and put it on the neck on here. So when the priest would sweat, it wouldn't get on the stole. And then they would take these off and wash them. As you see, this one hasn't been taken off or washed. So, but this one is mine, also given to me by a nun. These were owned by a priest. He had been a priest for 64 years when he died, and then and he had had them for about 50 years, and they were given to him by someone who was a priest before that. So it kind of carries down. So you'll keep your stoles in here. Now here are more. This one I used yesterday during the memorial service. It's a Coronation Tapestry with white and gold, which would be for like Easter and Christmas, funerals, things of the resurrection. Okay. Down here we have just some other things. If you notice here in our church, we also have these banners hanging up and other what we call paraments or vesting type things. We have some of these down here. Here are the white ones, for instance, for Easter. Those will be coming up soon. And then down here are more stoles of different kinds for different seasons. And see, now here they've done this, but usually almost all of these will be a lot of different various vestments. This is the junk drawer for all those things like cough drops for the priest, lighters, all that kind of stuff. Here are the blue and red banners, more white, and the green. So you'll see this over here. Right now these are like, look at this old Bible. Historically, if some of you want to see, you can come in a little bit more. This is traditionally in Anglican churches, which was part of Anglican Reformation, was when remembering the scriptures were not available in the language of the people. So Archbishop Cranmer and all around the 1540s, part of Anglican Reformation said, we're remaining Catholic, but we're also going to embrace the things that we did in the early church and stop keeping things away from the people. Stop that. So what they said is a Bible will be in every parish church available to anyone to come in and read anytime they want. So traditionally, you would have these big, huge, not a pocket Bible, as you can see. Look at this sucker. So a lot of churches, especially years ago, before they were just everywhere and you could get a Bible anywhere, would have one of these sitting in a table up near the altar, or a place where people could come and sit and read the scriptures at any time. This one you will see will have some of the ancient even illustrations in it. And mats. This is a very beautiful example of an old, what you would either call a parish or possible family Bible.
Is this St. John's?
Yes, this belongs to St. John's. I have no idea where it came from, but it
What
is.
year is that?
I don't.
Safe to assume it's not an NRSV.
It was presented to Mary by Sister Ella. Oh, December on Christmas Day, 1888.
Oh, wow.
It was given. It was given in 1888.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's kind of a.
Wow.
That sucker's heavy too. So, and then other, like what we call the liturgy books, like the books of the Gospels. There's other Bibles here. We also have what we call the altar book, but that's in the other. These are just extra things for different things. But let me go over here real quick. So, the Sunday kind of Eucharistic thing. All right, when I get vested, these are albs, A-L-B. It is the white, and it is the basic, most, what they call the first or almost undergarment for Christian vesting, of where you would get this alb and put it on for the celebration of the Eucharist. And that's, if it's Eucharist, you use white. Now, for clergy, I'm going to give you, so if it's a Sunday with communion, you put the alb on, and some of you, if you ever notice or watch me do this, after you put on the alb, you have this is called a cincture. And what happens with this is when I'll show you something, when you put it on, you kind of do it this, like a slip knot, turn like this, and then basically I make a loop here, pull it through, make a loop over here. This looks stupid with this on. Don't ever tell anybody to do this. So you do like this with the alb on. Then I get my stole. Kiss the cross from I take this and I take on this mantle Christ. And then you put it on and then I slip it through the two loops. Practical purpose, it keeps your stole from going all over the place and it keeps it hanging down straight. Okay? So that is, you put on your white alb.
So is that the main significance for tying it that way?
I tie it that way, yes. And most, like in seminary, is one of the first things I taught you. You will tie, I know you're not ordained yet, but you will have this for when you are a priest. And that's the way you will then put your stole down in between. So it's the Anglo-Catholic way. Now, we're in Lent, purple. Okay, here's the stole. Now, what do we call this?
Chasuble.
I was waiting for somebody to say a poncho. Okay, if you notice, it is just one. If you take this and laid it out flat, it makes one big circle, except it's kind of curved in for the arms here, and then the opening for the head. This comes almost directly from the Roman Empire. Early Christians, as the church began to develop and grow, there were things when they came together. A lot of times people came to a place for worship and they're like, well, who's the priest? Well, they kind of go, well, the guy over there with the stole on. And then when it came time to, if they were going to celebrate communion, the Eucharist, to symbolize that office in the celebration, there was a thing very similar that they call a chasuble, that it was a symbol of office or a symbol of authority. When you put that on, a lot of Romans, depending on your role, they wore different types of clothing. You've seen those things where they'll do this and they have it over their arms and stuff like this. Those were symbols of who they were and what they did. So the church was part of its culture. They took on those things and said, we wear them as a symbol of who we are in authority under Christ. So whenever you see these, it symbolizes a priest that you are celebrating the Eucharist, okay? And the chasuble is only to be worn in a communion service.
And did you bring all those? Those were yours?
No, this stole is mine because this was a gift given to me. This is my chasuble. And the thing weighs about 15 pounds. It's solid wool and fully lined. And it's very, you feel how heavy that is. It's pretty heavy. That's one of the ones where if you ever see the priest wanting to turn on the air conditioner and you're freezing, this is why. This stuff is, they can be very warm.
So basically then they're made to fit most people.
Yes. Now, like I have a friend in San Diego. He is 6'7". These chasubles like go down to his waist. So he has a special ones made for very tall. And then there are some women who are like 4'2", you know.
Yeah.
This thing's dragging on the floor, you know. So sometimes some custom have to be made, but there's a standard that'll kind of go from this height to this height. So purple is for Lent. When do we use this?
Advent.
Oh, somebody said it. Advent. Okay. And this is another beautiful one. So this is the churches. And then here is like, this is Coronation Tapestry, Easter, Christmas, all of that. But here's a little good education. There's something kind of like it, but not.
Wow.
This is not a Dracula outfit or any of that. Anybody know what you call this? It's a cope. C-O-P-E, cope. Now, if you watch, just the other day they had that service that they showed on the national news of the Queen, and they were remembering her, Prince Philip, and they had it at Westminster Abbey. Almost all of there were either the priests and the bishops who were assisting were wearing coats, meaning this is a service of great solemnity or of celebration. So like, for instance, at Easter, you can, during the liturgy of the word, the priest can wear the cope and they come in, or the bishop, and then with the time of the Eucharist, you take this off and then put on the chasuble.
Are you going to do that this Easter?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
There's several schools of thought about this. Is you can do that, or you can wear the chasuble through the whole service. You'll also notice, and this really takes into the thing with bishops. What bishops wear, that little hat, it's called a mitre. And then a lot of times the traditional wear during the Sunday service is a cope and mitre. And their crozier, their pastoral staff. So a lot of times you'll see the bishop in their alb, stole, cope, and the mitre. They can do the full celebration in that. You'll also equally see bishops who will have their pastoral staff, their mitre, and wear the the chasuble through the entire service. But the kind of old Anglican way was cope and then chasuble. So the reason they have a cope here is because it's usually only used for big celebration events. Okay? Or if we have another clergy person, they can also wear that. If you're having a service and it's not the Eucharist, this was originally and still is considered the most basic street guard. This is considered streetwear actually for clergy. What is this? It's a cassock. Now, this one, and actually I could, if I wanted to be real traditional, and maybe try to freak out our Mormon friends. Excuse me, LDS. If you put this on, your collar is here, and then the collar. This is called an Anglican cassock. There is a Roman cassock and an Anglican cassock. So it's really interesting that within ancient Catholic traditions, that there has been kind of what happened in Britain and what happened in Rome, kind of even manifested differently in the style of vestments. This cassock is what you call, it is double-breasted, like this. And so, I should never take that button off. I'm never gonna. A Roman cassock has about 150 buttons that go straight down the middle, and it opens up like this. Ours we put on, go bump, bump, button, 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 and then this little button here, I'll show you what this is for. So now I could put this on with my collar and walk around. In fact, you ever see on TV, you'll see the old priests where they're walking down the streets and stuff and have these on. We could still do them, but most clergy are too embarrassed to wear this. A lot of times on Good Friday, I've a lot of times put on my cassock and worn that as a thing of solemnity for all of Good Friday.
Showing that, I'm reminded of Roman church cassocks with red on it. Are there Monsignors in
Yes,
the
if you
Episcopal
get
Church?
red, what they call piping, the red symbolization and stuff, like if you have that if you see an Episcopal priest that has some red or purple piping, that means one of two things. They're either a dean of the cathedral or they're a canon of the diocese, meaning they are special appointed by the bishop's staff. So it's a symbol of who they are.
I think the cathedral I attended, he had a black thing with red.
Yeah, that makes
embroidery
sense.
on it,
That
yeah.
makes sense. Yeah. Now, these are the oldest, and you'll see if you go back to anything on TV, like if you watch,
Father Brown?
yeah, those, and then, okay, what was the big show with the BBC thing that went on for with the servants and the people, the rich people?
Downton Abbey.
Oh, upstairs,
Downton
downstairs.
Abbey, yeah. God, I can't believe I couldn't blank on it.
Nice.
If you see anything about the vicars and all they always are wearing a cassock and surplice. So if it's evening prayer or like from Good Friday, this, by the way, Good Friday, this I'll be wearing cassock, surplice, and a stole, because it's not a celebration of the Eucharist. So the stole, though, is your symbol of your office. This was considered your streetwear, and if you put this on, it's almost like a mini alb over it. So these were original. These are equally viable within Anglican services and Roman Catholic. This is called an English surplice, where the sleeves are kind of tapered with a point, and they're longer. Those ones you see that are really short, that always to me look like pregnant moo-moo gowns, those are called cottas, those little mini cut-off things. And the only reason they had those goes back to a historical thing, because back then there was a time where you did not have money. Fabric was so precious, and there was a time they didn't have it. So what they did is they only made it halfway down because they only had it. And all of a sudden, well, we've done that for 20 years, so that's what we should do now. But it was only done because they didn't have fabric before. So that kind
So this is very similar to what Jonathan wears sometimes.
Yes. Now, what he is the organist will wear a cassock and surplice. That's also a special ordered cassock. His does not have these little the things on the sleeves here, because it could catch on one of the stops. And also the sleeves here are cut, so his arms freely come out and it won't get caught while you're playing. Now, an organist also, this is the thing, now here's the tie-in. If you're wearing cassock, say we're having evening prayer or a service, I'll show you something that's extremely Anglican, and it's unfortunately just doesn't happen as much. Say you're having a service of evensong, evening prayer, morning prayer, and if you're a priest and you're participating or presiding, you would wear this, and you would wear two other things you don't see very often anymore. You have a tippet, or some also call it a preaching scarf. Very Anglican. And so what you would, so you put this on, and then you put your tippet. And if you notice, on a tippet, it has, you have two things. The shield of your church. So if it's the Episcopal Church of the United States or Anglican Church of Canada, they have this, but it's a red thing with green leaves in it to indicate the Anglican Church of Canada. Then your seminary, in which you got your master's or PhD from. So this is the seal of, it says Nashoda Sancta Theologicae Seminarii Siglium. It just means Nashoda, it's Nashoda House Seminary. So, yeah. So the Sancta meaning the holy of Nashoda Theological. And it's called Nashoda House, and this is the symbol of it. So that's what you have. Now, on top of that, you see that I was talking about this button right here? That's because you get your academic hood, and you then put this over your neck like so. I have to fluff it out a little bit. And then this ties onto that button so it doesn't slide all over the place.
And that's for evening prayer, you said?
Evening prayer, morning prayer. If, say you're having a big ecumenical service and there's no communion, and you're representing your tradition as an Episcopal or Anglican, and you're a priest, I would wear what they call academic, your academic wear of cassock, surplice, tippet, and hood. And I have to admit, it's one of those few things where we're wearing more like, ooh, I like this. Why don't we wear this more often? It's just really different. So this is kind of events. So you'll see there's all kinds of different vestments in here. that's pretty much enough with all that. I'll come back to this stuff. This is why we keep the Advent wreath in here. And you know, this will be coming out soon because this is the Paschal candle, the Passover candle. So it will be brought out on Easter Sunday, the first light of Easter, of the resurrection. These things over here are just kept for storage, and there's some sound systems in here. You will notice over here, like we keep, these are the lighters, the tapers. So you light with this, put the candles out with this. When we go into the church, I'll just show you the order of that. And that will be done. Here is the thurible. And if you're the person doing the thurible, you are the thurifer. And so when you hold like this, once you lift up this, like that, and then you put the charcoal in here, then in that counter there we have incense, and it's a really good, it's real frankincense, not some perfumed artificial stuff, it's the real stuff. You sprinkle it on, and if the priest says, then they bless it, and you say, I bless this incense as our prayers rise up before you as the prayers of the saints. Receive our prayers and worship on this day. Do that, wipe it down, you put this down, and that helps this from like going all over. And there are, when you normally are walking with it, a person will hold it like this, and you're like doing this as you walk. Because you need the air to kind of also kind of get it going. Now, there's the things, and then I can show you, so when we go to the altar, they then hand it to me, and I do the 3 for Trinity, the altar, the people, and then I sense the altar, walk around it, like that. Then when it's brought up to me at the communion time, when all that is set at the table, you make the sign of the cross over the bread and wine, and then once and then twice. One for saying one God, but the two natures of Christ, fully God, fully human. All these symbolisms, okay? This is, and the oneness of God. So there's symbolisms of that. You're blessing it, in other words. You're just doing a blessing over it. And in those occasions kind of be as a thing of celebration. And then you come out, because you bless things that are holy. And the last thing you bless is the people, because you are the holy people. And now if you have big celebrations and you get somebody who's really wants to set themselves free and being a thurifer, is they have that when they just let it go, girl, you know, they just go for it. Instead of just like this, they do things called a Queen Anne. And I'm going to show you.
Oh, watch out.
So as you're walking, you go, oh, and then you double. You keep walking like this.
I think I saw Bishop Hayashi do that.
Yeah, and you keep going, and then like this. And now one time somebody didn't have this on very good. Like up here, this opened up a little bit like that, and the charcoal went flying through the air, and I just went, Lord Jesus, help. And it landed on the pew next to a lady, and where were they going? So that's why it's always good to do your safety class before your therapy. So that is that. So let's just go next door, and we're almost done.
We have liability insurance for that.
Yeah. There is a story about this. Anybody heard of Tallulah Bankhead?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Tallulah Bankhead was the very rich socialite in New York City and was known to say anything that popped in her head. Tallulah Bankhead came to St. Bartholomew's on Fifth Avenue in Manhattan. St. Bartholomew's was across the street from the Waldorf Astoria in Manhattan. And it is a gorgeous big church. It was where all the big elite money went to in Manhattan. And she came on Easter, and she was sitting there on the aisle, and the thurifer was doing like this young guy, with his album on, he's sitting there doing like this, and she goes, leans over, and she goes, honey, I love your purse. Says, I love your outfit, but your purse is on fire. and just said that in the middle of the service. And to this day, people, I don't know why, remember Tallulah Bankhead saying that crazy thing. So, and it's good to have a sense of humor. But coming in real quick. getting ready to do a good bit of work in here about doing some, for instance, reorganizing and kind of setting things up to make it even easier, because this is what, you know, we use for the setting up of all of our worship services. So, you'll notice that this is lots of storage because of lots of things. Remember I mentioned piscina? Okay. You notice this side has a cover, and it can be locked to try to remember people, this is not where you just dispose of any kind of garbage or anything. This side is a regular sink that goes into the sewer system. When you are cleaning the chalice and the paten and all the things that have that, it would have had consecrated elements and so forth. You are to lift this, and then if a church has a piscina, this does not go to the drainage in the sewer system. This goes directly into the ground underneath the church, to the earth. So you're returning to the earth what is from the earth. So if you're cleaning and say you have a whole bunch of extra consecrated wine, and you're like, I'm just not going to consume it. You get it, and you can pour it down here. That or you get Bruno and he'll drink all of it. So you were smirking, I got you. So you can pour it down in here, and then it can be rinsed. So that was kind of the purpose of, this is something holy. Don't just wash it into the sewer. You know, in the end, God can deal with it no matter what. You know, in the end, I guess if you said when it comes down to, is it going to matter? I didn't quote, you're videotaping me. Maybe it does. I mean, it's okay. But our preferred way of, if we're doing things and we're wanting to show reverence for what we love and what we care for, we would do it that way, to show respect and to honor the presence of Christ in us and in the things we do. So that's why that is used. Okay? Over here, you'll see very quickly, these are like the chalice. So here we keep things that are the silver silver. Important thing about a chalice is they're always, if you notice, it's either going to be silver or gold. Okay? Quite often, this is to be all pure silver. The inside, this one is lined inside with gold. Silver and gold are very non-porous. So things like bacteria and stuff cannot attach itself to it. So one of the reasons we use these is they are non-porous. It is a thing that is very easy to keep clean and is much more sanitary than you would imagine. People kind of freak out sometimes when they come in that we have the common cup. And at some point here, we're going to reintroduce it. And as you notice, we haven't done this with COVID. And I think everybody has a little anxiety or nervousness about it. The thing, and Bishop Hayashi is more gung-ho on this than me. He's already said, go ahead and return to the common cup. He said, you don't have to, but I've given full permission, because you actually have a much better chance of catching something, being either near a person or touching something they've touched, than from actually sharing the cup. And here, there's a couple of reasons. On this, we keep also the linens in here. This, you'll notice quite often, in something like this, this is called a purificator, and there's a real good reason for that name. Let me get out the others, though, and show you. This is a lavabo towel. Lavabo means to wash. And if you notice, when they wash my hands at the very end, when I'm setting up, so this is what I dry my hands with a bowl. This is the paten. This is a corporal. The corporal means corpus, the body. This is where it's folded out, and you put everything, and the consecration is done on this. And the reason is, let me show you, when you open this up, there's a reason it's done like this. When you open it up, in fact, there's a very good reason. There's a piece of consecrated bread. And that's the proper way to dispose of it. What happens is when you do this, when everything is done, the bread and the wine are consecrated here. When you're done, say you're using real bread, or in this case we had even a part of one of the wafers, breaks off and so forth. When I'm done, if you notice, I fold in, 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 in. And then if there are any consecrated bread or wine, or well, bread in this case, it would be here on the corporal. and then the proper way to dispose of it. Come here. Open this. So if it's consecrated, like that, fold it back, you rinse, return from the earth to the earth, and then you have this. So that's, you put that on. The corporal is then what all these things are put upon. Then the chalice is, when it's open, is put there, and then the paten, the plate, that's what a paten is, it's right here, okay? And then there's bread. So when you're doing, I'm going to go back to this whole thing about with the common cup. Say you receive the bread and we have this. Now you can intinct, and the one thing we're going to do is the problem with intinction, where you take it and to dip, is the problem is some people don't, you can't get everybody on board about don't stick your fingers in the wine. Okay? It's meant to hold it, to lightly dip. But in practice what happens is people get their fingers, you've just contaminated the whole thing. The good news is, however, the wine we use is sacramental wine, which I have to admit is hard to find in this state. But you can't get because you can't order it. And see, the wine, everywhere I've lived, if you get it, monks make it, and it has to be exactly at least 18% alcohol. Sacramental wine is different. You have, they purposely, the way it's done is to have a higher alcohol level. And that is, if you have 18% alcohol or higher, it will kill all germs from your bacteria from your mouth. Okay? So if you have this is what happens. You see that little stain on there? What happens is you get the wine, you usually get a little bit on it, then you have this, and then when you come up to give it, you said the blood of Christ, the cup of salvation, the person touches it, leads it to their lips. You get this, you wipe, turn. Go to the next person. Wipe, turn. And if you have, in fact, the wine we have over here right now is 23% alcohol. You ain't getting a cold or anything from that. Okay? Now, whether you're comfortable with that is another question for you. Okay? So, but the norm is for us, and it's very usually a strong thing as Anglicans, is coming and that the people receive the bread and the wine fully. So what we're doing is okay, what we're doing, and we've done that as a necessary thing during COVID. But soon we should offer this in some way again. If we're doing intinction, we may do what we're doing now, if a person wishes that, to get it so that one person is controlling and not sticking their finger in, so that when people are sipping, they're not taking from somebody sticking their finger in. Okay? So,
What is the purpose of the plate?
the plate is what you put the bread on.
Oh, no, I'm sorry, the square.
Oh, this here is mainly when, and that's a good question, because when you put the paten, the plate on here, you get this pawl and you stick it on top, and it was a very practical purpose to cover the bread so bugs, flies, and all those things didn't, and also to help in case a breeze came through the church, it doesn't blow it all away. So you kind of put that, it's a covering. Now, what's going to happen, and you'll see when we get our green set, there's a thing called a burse and veil. That's where you call a vesting the chalice. Look at the sign over here, you'll see this. Here's a burse and a veil. So when we get on the altar, and in fact, we have a bunch. Oh, I would really encourage you all to take some of these. This right here shows what is done and set out and what they're called and how it's put on the altar for setting up for communion. Here, you can take those. There's some more over there. Take one of those with you as well. Okay, so there's all of these things here that we use for setup. Right now, we're not using regular bread because you have to touch and it would crumble. We're trying to use things that were still part of the COVID thing. But we'll look into other ways of, we'll see what the community is willing to do.
I missed the old bread, it tasted good.
I'm sorry?
I missed the old bread, it tasted good.
Yeah, because it was real bread. What we use as wafers is pure whole wheat and water, and that's just what it is. So we keep all of these things in here that we use. So basically, you know that this is kind of where we get and put everything together. They're going to expand it to more things over here. There are things here called, these are cruets. That's, of course, for your bread, for your water and for your wine. And then we also use grape juice. At the Wednesday service, right now I'm using a more simple set for the Wednesday Eucharist. Okay? Here is by the way, when the altar book. So a lot of times you'll see this. This is what the priest is then using up there when we're having the Eucharist. And if you notice, it does have red letters. So it's basically like the communion service put up there for those at the altar. And this is called a missal stand, where you put that. And then this is the book of the Gospels. Okay. And then all these things are put in here and then set up. The last thing is, just let's go right into the church and we're done. See from what I was saying earlier, that this is a one-step platform. And this platform can be moved. So we would technically call this area the sanctuary. And if you notice, when people come for communion, there are also various traditions and customs you can do. These are here because some people still like to come and to kneel when they receive communion. Completely fine if you'd like to do that, and if you don't, that's okay, you can stand. And everybody already has the sense of what they like, and it's fine either way. And we come around the table. Now, altar, when you have an altar, you always have what's called a fair linen. And it is the base covering over the altar. And right now, we do have a frontal on the altar. And if any of you want to come around, you've probably never seen the back side, many of you. But it's basically what is on the front side. And during Holy Week, when we strip the altar Thursday night, we're going to get a real sense. I would encourage you all to be here for Maundy Thursday because it is very dramatic and intense as a liturgy. At the end, there is the stripping of the altar, and everything is removed. So it will be bare like this. Now, you'll notice this altar is done in an older style where the wood's very dark. It's very, very dark. And it has these crosses that match this cross system that goes around the building of the church. So, and here you always have what you call your altar candles. And then these candles here are called office candles. They represent the 6 times of day of prayer. And see, the office means morning prayer, evening prayer. And they're the original monastic offices that are done, you pray at 6 different times of the day. So quite often, if you're not having communion, but you're having some other kind of service, you would light these candles. And traditionally, a lot of times, they would not light these candles. But if you were having Eucharist, you light the altar candles. And then you light all of them together. A lot of people, we've kind of lost that sense of why they came. They're now almost mainly for decoration of what we've just always used. And then you always have a cross behind the altar. We use our Processional Cross, and part of that is the way the building changed. If you take a look over here, this is where the old high altar was. And you'll see a very traditional, in a lot of American churches from the 18 to early 1900s, you would have an altar cross very similar to this. Now this altar, before this was all done, this was actually higher, and there were steps coming up here, and this kind of came out. So originally the priest would come, this would come out, and the priest. So there was actually, come here, they went up a set of steps, and this area here. Then it went up 3 steps here. So I'd probably be standing about here. But here they took all of that out and brought the floor down to where it originally was. So back then, the priest a lot of time would actually celebrate like this. They would turn around and say, "The Lord be with you," and then they would turn back around and do that. Right now, in our Wednesday Eucharist, we take, this is, from what I understand, this is an altar from Wales and Britain, and we just slide it here and put the 2 altar candles here, and we turn the chairs around, and then we use this for the celebration. Now, as far as a custom and gesture, the reserved sacrament, or what we might call the tabernacle, it's also you'll hear a word occasionally called ombre. This is where consecrated bread and wine are kept. And if it is present, if it is in there, the candle is always to be lit. This is a week-long candle to last for 7 days. So during the week, you don't have to check it, and you'll know that it'll burn. When you usually come, if it's And again, here are different customs. If you're approaching the reserved sacrament for some reason, there's two gestures that are quite phenomenal, maybe a sign of reverence, or usually if it actually is here, the most common is to genuflect. And then, if you know, I'm going to open it so you can see. Inside are the consecrated bread and consecrated wine. So if someone can't make it to church for whatever reason, they may be ill, sick, or whatever it could be, and we're going to bring communion to them. So this is bread and wine we consecrated on Sunday with the full community, which we then put here, and it's consecrated. We can then take this and put it into a kit to take it then to the person at home, saying, we bring the body of Christ to you. So this is a place of considerate reverence, because we do believe in the real presence, that Christ is present in the elements for us, so we show reverence and respect for that. So that's why the candle is there. On Maundy, Thursday, all of that will change at the end of the service. There will be what we call an altar of repose, a place of rest, where it's on the night in which he was betrayed and he's spending time in the garden, that everything is stripped, and we will take the bread and the wine and this candle and take it away to a separate place. And Jesus' words were saying, will you stay with me? Will you pray with me through the night? He knew what he was facing, and he was being betrayed, but the disciples kept falling asleep. So we bring that and we put that. This is left open and barren. All the places that we experienced, our experience of Jesus, have now being moved as we now walk to the cross. So it is moved. And then only that light is left burning where it is. And on Good Friday, if you have a Good Friday service, we were to have it here. When at the end of the service, people would come forward, say the Lord's Prayer, and they would take the remaining bread and wine that is left, and they call it, the official name is the communion of the pre-sanctified. That means the bread and wine's already been blessed. So you come and you receive the communion, and then as a symbol of now facing death, the candle that's always a symbol of the presence and the risen Christ, you take that light on after the last bread and wine is consumed, and you snuff it out. You say, it is finished. And there is no light then until Easter morning. So there's kind of a symbolism that, yes?
During, not talking Easter time, but if the candle accidentally went out?
I know, and boy, in the seminary went, it was like the end of the world had happened. But quite honestly, the thing is the candle, once it's lit on Easter morning, you light the Paschal candle, the symbol of Easter. From that, when at the end of the Eucharist on Easter Sunday, if you'll notice, watch this, there will be brought to the side, it will be brought up to the altar. And when there is, because I'll consecrate extra bread and wine on Easter Day, and I'll take a taper and light it from the Paschal candle, and light this candle for the first time. And the tradition is that candle, that flame, will be carried non-stop until Good Friday. That the presence, the light of Christ will always be present. So what generally happens is this altar guild is changing these. They come in right when it's low to take a taper to light from that and light it to the next candle. I always joke it's kind of like the religious Olympic flame. It just keeps going and transferring. So you would do that, pack it to another, and then put it in. The next week, you continue that. You know what, though? Sometimes something happens. And someone doesn't get here in time, and it doesn't always make that. But it's the intention of our hearts.
But the reserve is still fine.
It is still fine. God deals with this stuff.
Yes, okay.
Remembering a lot of the things I'm telling you, they all have importance and they're meaningful. But when they become the ends, the means, where we get so bent out of shape, that's when it becomes problematic. Right. So for me, the presence of the bread and wine is there. I don't care if a candle's lit or not. And it's okay. But we do that for a reason. So, okay, you'll notice that these white and black things are the stations of the cross. I think I'm going to offer that on Good Friday at noon. It's traditionally when it's offered. where people come in and we physically walk to each station and walk through the crucifixion with Jesus. So those are here in the church. Any questions about what is in here or what we do?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So the candles over here,
Oh, good. Very.
are they only to be lit on Sunday?
No, they can be lit anytime. And there's sometimes people come in the church during the week and they kind of want to pray. And that comes from a symbol of like, and you'll notice there's this Nave. This right here, there's one over there. This is called a prie-dieu. It's basically French meaning to pray, a place to pray. So traditionally you would come and you would kneel and you would offer your times of prayer for intention yourself. That area is kind of done as a special place of intentions. So there is the cross there that sometimes people would then look at and focus on. But it's a place where you say, I'm praying for this, or I'm praying for this person. And the symbol, again, of a prayer, there's different ones. There's light, and then there's like incense, all these things about a symbol of our prayer, and then to carry on. So a lot of times we might kneel and maybe offer a prayer, say, like for instance, my brother right now is struggling with cancer. And there's times where I've come in here and I just want to pray, and for he has a full presence of the peace of Christ during this time. And I light a candle, and I say his name. And it's a way of trying to remember that it can be done any time. And the light is left to burn as long as it goes. It's similar to one of the things that was very meaningful in a whole different perspective. I got to go to Jerusalem and go to what is left of the Western Wall, where there is the prayer of what's left of the temple. And one of my closest friends in the world, while I was over there, died, and I couldn't come back for the funeral. And they were very devout in their faith. And it's still hard for me to talk about this, that I took their name and put it on a piece of paper. And I came to that wall. At first I felt a little intimidated because this is a place of holiness for our Jewish brothers and sisters. But I remember one of the persons who was there, and he was a man who lived in Jerusalem, and he just kind of gave me this, it's okay, come on. And so I came up to the wall, and he says, do you have an intention for someone? And I said, yes, for my friend David, who died. And he said, do you have it on the paper? I said, yes. And he took my hand and guided it to the wall, and we put it in the crack of the wall of the temple. And he said, she will be here forever. So it was a very moving thing that I could do, and where that simple paper in a place that we knew was of holy, that is kind of like a symbol of that. We come, it's a place where I offer my intentions and where I hope to meet God in the midst of it. Gosh, there's a million things. I'm keeping you up too long. I think we need to go. So,
It's 1:40.
yeah, it's getting late. So I hope that some of these things were helpful. And I know there's things that we just barely touched on, some of the things we didn't get to that may be more important. If there's any type of things on some of the subjects you may not have got handed, I'm going to scan all the things that I've handed out, and I will be happy to send you any of those. Or if there's something on that you say, I'd like to know a little bit more about this or that, or something more about Scripture or the prayer book or whatever, let me know. I have a lot of easy resources, anything from the short to much more involved, and I'm happy to make those available. And for those of you who are preparing for either confirmation or reception, and we also have the baptisms, I'll be following up with you more about the preparation in the sense of when we get closer, we'll probably have a time to gather that Saturday before, if possible, for those who can. If not, for on Sunday to get here early, we'll go over about what will kind of happen. So you're not spending the day worried about where am I standing, what do I do, am I here? We'll go through that so you can relax, hopefully, and enjoy part of the celebration. Okay? So we'll follow up with you and get all of that ready, and your certificates and all those kind of things. And thank you for whether you came or not for whether it was one session or all of them. I appreciate it. And I'm so sorry it's kind of quick, fast, and we're just touching on so many things. And if there is any things, because we're going to be looking at for our adult education about what to offer, and we want to make it as broad and diverse as what people would like, and we can offer more than one. So if there's like a topic that maybe we've touched on, you say, I'd be interested in something, if you did a couple of week thing on one topic or somebody else here, we could do that. Let me know and I'll work with our team and we're happy to offer that, okay? Thanks.